Congresswoman, Republican, 10th District, freshman. Do we have to say that, right? Freshman Barbara Comstock.
Yes.
Congresswoman, great to have you with us.
Good morning. Great to be with you, John.
Now, you put a statement out yesterday on President Obama's speech. You were not so excited about it. Share with our audience why.
Well, I got the opportunity last week to spend a little time with Tony Blair. And, of course, Tony Blair is so strong on the war on terror and has talked about having a sophisticated and informed but very, robust and active, engagement against ISIS. He called it Islamist extremism. He says you have to call it what it is. And he is very sophisticated and strong. And then we heard from the president, who had no plan, even though we recently passed the National Defense Authorization Act requiring them to have a plan. And, but listen, none of us are surprised by what this president does, because my friend Peggy Noonan wrote a few weeks ago, we are post-President Obama now. We are just, we have to look to the future. We have to have strong leaders who are going to understand this threat. And the president has made clear he is not one of those leaders. So that's why Congress is acting. And we put that requirement in the National Defense Authorization Act. Other people in the administration and members of the administration hopefully will do that. But we in Congress took action on the Syrian refugees and requiring additional vetting. Today we're going to be voting on adopting different rules on the visa waiver system, so that people who've traveled to countries like Syria won't be able to get an automatic visa anymore. So we need to increase our intelligence and national security capabilities that we have weakened over the past few years, that Edward Snowden exposed to the terrorists, not just to the world, but he exposed it to them, so they know how we operate now. So we really need to up our game in the intelligence field, and we need to take this threat on all fronts.
Well, Congresswoman, the bottom line, though, is that whatever you try to pass, even if it gets through the U.S. Senate and gets on Obama's desk, he's already threatened to veto all of it. So while...
No, actually, the president hasn't threatened to veto the visa waiver system, because this has strong bipartisan support. And people realize we have these foreign fighters all over Europe. These are European citizens. So say a French citizen goes and travels to Syria, trains with terrorists. We have U.S. citizens who are doing that now. That's why we have to have a much more sophisticated approach to this, where you have multiple layers of intelligence that are checking on things, that we're checking on our banking system, which is required to report on transactions that are large and suspicious. We have that system in place. We can look at it, see if we need to strengthen it more in light of what happened in California. But we also need to see, did those guys fall down on the job? Because I know when I worked at the Justice Department in 9/11, we put bills were passed at that time. We put a lot of those systems in place. I had a very good friend of mine who headed up that effort and was very aggressive on terrorism financing. So we need to attack this on all fronts. The president, we are getting bipartisan majorities in Congress. On our Syrian refugee bill, we had bipartisan strong majority on that. So I think we have to, and I know I've talked about this on your show before, we have to engage the American people to step up and be the leaders and encourage the president to come with them in terms of this kind of sophisticated, informed leadership, confident leadership about America, but that is informed by our experience and what we know we can do on lots of fronts. And I know, you've had others on this morning, and I want to address what Donald Trump said, because that is not the informed, sophisticated way to go about things.
Why don't we hold that a minute, because I'm going to get to that in a second. But I want to get back to what you just said about convincing President Obama to change his ways. Look, he's been there now a long time. He's not going to change his ways. You look at that speech, Congresswoman, last night. The only time the president got passionate is when he talked about restricting firearms from law-abiding citizens and political correctness. When he talked about not turning on one another and things like that. No, only that, he blamed the whole thing on the wars, not the moves that he made. So I have no confidence that this president is going to change anything.
I agree. I have no confidence in this president also. That's why Congress is acting, and that's why we have to, when we have a lot of the Democrats with us, then and gaining, like I believe this visa waiver bill today will probably have a veto-proof majority. I expect it may have one in the Senate. That makes the president irrelevant. If we have a veto-proof majority on these measures, the president doesn't matter what he does. We will be able to pass the laws over of any threat or any veto that he tries to implement.
So if we don't have a veto-proof majority, are you willing to vote to defund these efforts like this Syrian refugee effort? If you defund it, then there isn't anything he can do. Veto.
Well, listen, let's not plan on failure. I think we are trying to put in common sense systems that have overwhelming bipartisan support. And let's make our case, make it confidently, make it strongly, make it with our Democratic colleagues who are saying to the president, you even see Hillary Clinton now saying, whoa, this president doesn't have a plan. So, I think, let's let that, his speech was universally panned by everybody, certainly doesn't inspire confidence. But, as Winston Churchill said, the American people do the right thing when they've tried everything else. I think they've seen that this president isn't going to step up, so the American people are. And Congress
Common
will.
sense. Congresswoman, let's get to, before we get to Trump's statements, when you looked at that speech last night, and I know because your statement went out so quickly, you reacted to it very negatively.
Actually, Sunday night, but yes, yeah.
Yes, Sunday night, I'm sorry. What do you think Obama's objective is here, really?
I don't know, and given my concern about the country, I think we just have to act, and I can't psychoanalyze the president and his failures. I think we just have to move through the next year planning for the future and showing the American people what we want to do and what the bipartisan majority that we have put together to do the kind of common sense things that we need to do to keep this country safe and secure, but do it within our constitutional framework and our welcoming framework, not the kind of bombastic, outrageous statements made by Mr. Trump, which demonstrate that he doesn't understand or have even the beginning of an understanding of our intelligence and our national security capabilities and what we need to do on that front. And he scares me every bit as much as the president does in his ignorance of what we need to do to keep this country safe.
Well, yesterday, Republican front runner for the nomination, and by the way, Congresswoman, as you know, I predicted back in May he's going to be the nominee, and I believe he's going to walk out of Cleveland in July, and he is going to be the nominee. But yesterday, he very clearly called for a moratorium on Muslims coming into the United States, whether they're visitors or anything else. And he said, look, we don't know what the extent is of what we're dealing with right now. And so why is it bad to just say, look, we're going to take 6 months to figure this out? Why is that a bad move?
Well, it's unconstitutional. It's un-American. And look, people don't, religion is something that's internal and in a belief. It's not something that you necessarily wear on your sleeve. There can be French citizens who have converted to the Muslim faith. And how is he going to ban them? I mean, it is a silly idea, and it makes no sense. And it doesn't have anything to do with the threat that we're doing. I mean, the way Carly Fiorina said, he overreacts really in the same way that the president does to things. And it just demonstrates his lack of understanding of how you have to deal with the terrorist threat. You do it on many different fronts, and you target behavior of terrorists, not their faith, some of these people have been, we had a 17-year-old in my district who was recruiting people for ISIS. We've had people from this country go over, U.S. citizens, go over, train in Syria, and come back. We are watching them now. Now, Mr. Trump said, oh, those people can come back. So if you're a U.S. citizen and you go train with terrorists, Mr. Trump has said, oh, come on back. We'll welcome you back. We're just going to ban other people who've done nothing wrong. So it shows a lack of understanding of our basic constitutional systems, but also a lack of understanding of the terrorist threat and how they operate and how they're always changing what they do. And we always have to have our intelligence on top of their latest things that they do. They're now using women. You know, they could turn to elderly people to do it. So they are turning to, you know, the underwear bomber, where he did not come from the Mideast. You know, when he got on the plane, you know, to go to Boston, that was going on just as I was, you know, at the Justice Department, and that was something that we, you know, a whole new threat that we saw there. So you have to be very sophisticated and granular and have many streams of intelligence and your cautions that we are taking. That's why we have the see something, say something. Certainly people in that community in California should have been encouraged to say, hey, if you see something, but it's not going to be something that you might just see in the Muslim community. It could be anywhere, because this terrorist threat is going and finding disaffected young people wherever they can find them and try and draw them in. That's what cults do.
Wait a minute, Congresswoman. In all due respect, Catholics aren't beheading people and shooting them at their workplace. Protestants aren't doing that.
No, what I'm saying is that
Jews aren't doing that. Christians aren't doing that. Muslims are doing it. So, I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, it's like we're right?
Islamic extremists and Islamic terrorists are doing that, but they are also recruiting disaffected people. They're going to our jails and trying to recruit people. Those people they're recruiting aren't necessarily going to be what somebody might think is your, you know, the picture of a terrorist. That's my point. That is, you know, it's like spy recruitment. You know, the whole idea of recruiting somebody is recruiting somebody you don't suspect. But yes, we know there are parts of the world, and that's why we need to deal with ISIS over there. We need to have a much more robust program in attacking ISIS, and we have shrunk their footprint a bit now. But, you know, as Tony Blair told us last week, you know, they have land the size of Great Britain now. We need to attack that. We need to shrink them there. But it's also a threat that's all around the world now. So we need to have an intelligence system that understands that this isn't an isolated threat, and it's going to be the threat of our time. And we need to be, you know, confident, vigilant, and strong in attacking it, something that the president isn't doing, and something that you cannot just be bombastic and think that that's going to solve the problem. It's much harder than just stamping your feet and yelling and coming up with silly and unconstitutional solutions.
Are you willing to live with a President Assad in Syria if we can maybe get a solve it by engaging Assad? Because the other alternative to that, the way I see it, is we're going to have to send in troops, and then what? I mean, even if we got them out of the area, there would be a vacuum as soon as we went home, and then the whole thing would start up again.
Well, I think the president has created a vacuum by not engaging people who would have taken on Assad. I mean, Assad has, you know, gassed his own people and killed people. So these are, you know, and I don't think just letting that vacuum continue is a good idea. Russia is now coming in, and Russia is taking advantage of our lack of leadership here. That's why we have to do what people, you know, return to Tony Blair, because he's been a leader on this when our president hasn't. And I think you do have candidates on our side. You see who are Republicans who are talking about this. Marco Rubio is talking about a much more sophisticated way of approaching this, as is Chris Christie. And you know, Carly Fiorina has talked about this in detail too. And that's those conversations are difficult and hard to have, but that's the kind of conversation we need to have, not just throwing out unconstitutional ideas that are not in keeping with the American way.
So,
and Ted Cruz, I was happy to see, also disagreed with Mr. Trump. So I was happy to see that Ted Cruz, who is a constitutional scholar in his own right, certainly would not subscribe to these ways of doing things.
All right, I've only got 2 more minutes, but let's bottom line it, because we're like 65 days out or something from Iowa, where Trump has the lead. I think it's going to be very difficult for any Republican right now to defeat him if he wins Iowa or comes in second or wins New Hampshire. So with all of this hand-wringing going on within the establishment, Congresswoman, what happens if indeed Donald Trump is the Republican nominee for 2016? What happens?
Well, I disagree with your thesis on the establishment. I think it's common sense conservative. I think you've seen everyone from Jeb Bush to Ted Cruz denounce Mr. Trump's comments. And I would point out that, in the last several presidential elections, the person who was leading at this point in Iowa did not win the Iowa caucus, and the person who won the Iowa caucus did not win the nomination. So I think we've seen in the New Hampshire primary that I saw recently somebody wrote that over half the people who decide the week before the primary. So I think there's a lot more discussion to be had. I think there's going to be a lot more informed, focused discussion on these very real threats. And I think with our new speaker, Speaker Ryan, he has been having those discussions, and we've been working very quickly on our front in Congress, trying to lay out how we will have a stronger military. We've added additional funding to the defense because we need that on homeland security, on defense. Certainly, given these feckless policies of this president, and we are going to, pass the bill, the visa waiver bill that we're dealing with today. But we're also going to start talking about new policies on taxes and, lowering our taxes, bringing businesses back, having a 21st century tax system that will allow us to have that great 21st century economy that districts like mine with high tech and cutting edge entrepreneurs that want to really grow this economy can be unleashed. We can get a 21st century healthcare system because we have passed a budget in the Senate, just passed budget reconciliation that, defunded much of the heart of Obamacare, and it's going to go to the president's desk. That's something when we get a Republican president that he'll be able to sign in the first week that he's president, is defunding all of that. So that's, that's a little over a year away when we can, get those kind of bills on a Republican president's desk and really see strong action that'll turn this country around, have a strong economy that'll allow us to have that strong, confident defense that we need to do and tackle a lot of these difficult problems.
All right, Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, we're out of time. Will I see you at the Advance this weekend?
Well, I'm not going to be able to make it down there because I have a lot of district events, and my good friend Jerry Thompson, who just lost her husband, the great Fred Thompson, that I know a lot of your listeners know, is going to also be in town, so I did not want to miss seeing her. So I'll miss it, but I give my best to everyone down there, and I know you'll have a great time.